If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain how I found out about this. It's free. It's on your app store. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right now from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Please, I urge you, don't waste another minute. I wasted 3 years. I attended all kinds of events to learn all the steps. I was so confused, and it was right here. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Do it now. Good Saturday, April 3rd, 2021. For the Heart and Home podcast, I'm Sabah Fakhoury. The flags over the U.S. Capitol flew at half-staff in honor of William, also known as Billy Evans, an 18-year Capitol Police officer. Evans died yesterday after a 25-year-old man rammed his car into 2 Capitol Police officers standing at a barricade outside the U.S. Capitol building. The young man was shot and killed after he got out of his car and lunged at the officers with a knife. As a result, the Capitol building was put on lockdown and the National Guard was brought in, putting the city on edge just as some of the wire fencing was coming down and after the deadly January 6th insurrection. A few updates on the Harry and Meghan fallout. On Wednesday, March 31, the Mail in the United Kingdom ran a story that said the Archbishop of Canterbury that Harry and Meghan's wedding story, that they had been married 3 days before, he says legal wedding was on Saturday and it would have been a serious criminal offense if he signed a certificate knowing it was false. So I don't know why Meghan said that she got married, but maybe she just misspoke. As for Miss Sharon Osbourne, she put her big girl pants on and had 2 Twitter posts this week. The first was of a dog sitting on a wakeboard with music playing to the song "It's Alright." Okay. Then she posted a photo of her in her PJs and a robe with a new puppy. So I guess she's doing just fine, or at least she's trying to tell us that. She has not lost any Twitter supporters. She's still at 2.3 million followers. She has not said anything about what's happening next. Now, I have seen reports saying that she is going to be suing her former employer, CBS, for forcing her to resign after she had an emotional outburst on a show with a coworker who pressed her on her support of a friend, Piers Morgan, and things did not go too well after that. So I don't know, when you usually sue your employer, it's to get your job back. I don't think she's going to get her job back. And she's most likely going to just have to move on. Maybe she's looking for some type of financial compensation. I mean, she worked there for 11 years. And then all of a sudden, boom, your career is over overnight. Okay, back to real news. A new CDC study shows vaccines cut COVID infections. The data is from 4,000 people who had been vaccinated with either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines between December 2020 and March 2021. The group was made up of healthcare workers, first responders, delivery workers, and teachers. The vaccines show some efficacy against all the currently known variants and good efficacy against one, the B117 strain, also known as the UK virus. Vaccines induce not just antibodies, but so-called cellular immunity, meaning they stimulate production of specialized virus-fighting cells called T cells, which compared to antibodies, they work against a broader range of variants and they last longer. This week, I also received my second dose of the Pfizer. I did not get ill and just have a little sore arm. Now, new information came out, which I hadn't seen before, where Pfizer said that the vaccine is good for 6 months. Now, this was the first I had seen of it this week, and I'm just wondering if other people are catching on and whether they know that maybe we're going to be getting more booster shots and this is going to be kind of like a regular thing, just like you got your flu shot. Well, one thing scientists are learning is that it's hard to predict the course of the coronavirus pandemic. Even the vaccine optimists believe the virus could be eradicated. What they do see is the possibility that the virus could become less of a threat than the seasonal flu. Of course, it'll be hard to return to normal because we're going out to restaurants and international travel. It's a small world. CNN ran a story that there's a dangerous coronavirus variant that's wreaking havoc in other parts of the world. So the U.S. must stick with safety measures over the next few months to prevent that kind of damage as the variant takes more of a hold coming onto this side of the United States. They mentioned the B117 variant, first found in the United Kingdom, is more contagious. It may cause more severe disease and is rapidly infecting younger populations. So, initially the people who got vaccinated, it wasn't given to everyone. So now it's starting to be opened up to other people less than 50 years old. And those are the people that are at risk. Recent research suggests the strain may also be more deadly. Coronavirus cases are rapidly rising in Michigan, where I live, New York, New Jersey, and other northeastern states. In Michigan, 6,000 new infections were reported yesterday alone. And we were, I think, the top state in the country last week or the week before of infection. On Tuesday, New Yorkers aged 30 and up became eligible to get the COVID-19 vaccines. New Yorkers 16 and older will also be able to receive vaccines starting on April 6, putting New York ahead of a target set by the Biden administration to make all U.S. adults eligible by May 1. Now, there's a growing fourth wave that is giving new urgency to experts who say we must vaccinate fast to prevent a more serious vaccine variant that could render current vaccines ineffective. Well, I mean, we're told that our vaccine should protect us against new variants. So I don't know why the experts are saying that. But here's what they are watching. There are several variants that are of concern. I mentioned the UK variant, which is the B117. There's also the South African variant, the B1351. There's the Brazil variant, P1, and now there's the California variant. And there's just too many numbers in that for you to even remember. Now, last month, March, was a pivotal month in the United States. Data for that month are only just now starting to come in and is now available. But a new study in the journal called Cell estimates that as data catch up, they will show that the B117 became the dominant variant in many U.S. states by late March. The other one, the other three, they are not as widespread, although the California variant has got pretty much most of the western side of the country, whereas the UK has most of the northern countries and some of the southern. But it's very spotty. The Brazil has the least, and it's showing that in, I believe it's in Hawaii. So the main one is the UK variant that just seems to have just taken off. So right now, growing evidence shows the 3 authorized vaccines currently offer protection against the variants, but the more people who lack immunity, the more people who give the virus chances to mutate into new variants. Meanwhile, in Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron announced a national lockdown on Wednesday and closed schools and non-essential businesses. Speaking from the Élysée Palace on national television, Mr. Macron said new measures were needed after his strategy of relying on targeted restrictions failed to get the pandemic under control. And the reason for that is because they have not vaccinated that much. So much of the country has been left vulnerable to that more contagious coronavirus variant, which has sent people to the intensive care units, and COVID-19 patients have filled up the hospitals. Meanwhile, the airline industry is going to release a COVID-19 passport for iPhone users. So coming up this month, travelers will be able to store verified COVID-19 test results and vaccination certificates on their phone. And so that's going to become available for iPhone users around April 15th. And then they're going to have another version that's going to be released later for Android users. On Tuesday, the World Health Organization and China released a long-awaited joint report into the origins of COVID-19. And they claimed that nothing new, which they had told us back in February, that the transmission came from bats to another animal and then subsequently was given to humans as the most likely way that the pandemic began. But they never really tell us how it happened and where it happened and why it happened. And the World Health Organization team that had that investigation, they had to actually have their report reviewed by the Chinese government. And so a lot of people are a little leery of the report, and they're just not trusting what the report has to say. The review was conducted by the World Health Organization team of international experts that traveled to Wuhan, China, back in January. And it's supposed to be like a first step into, continuous investigation into the virus's origins. But as I mentioned, many of the report's conclusions were already discussed during a press conference back in February. And so really nothing new. And meanwhile, the Biden administration and 13 other governments criticized the World Health Organization report and called for more openness from China. And this prompted concerns from some experts that perhaps it's going to affect U.S.-China relations. Meanwhile, the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal wrote a report called The Wuhan Whitewash. And so it said, a World Health Organization report on COVID's origin echoes Chinese propaganda. So it looks like not many people are too happy with the report, and they're not taking it seriously. People have been waiting for this a long time, and the findings really, they tell us nothing. The opinion piece says that the U.S. State Department had warned in January. There was a fact sheet about the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That's WIV, it's called. There was researchers from that facility that had developed symptoms consistent with both COVID-19 and common seasonal illness in the autumn of 2019. And so we keep hearing this thing that there's a possibility that it escaped from that lab, which was studying the viruses, and yet the World Health Organization report is saying, oh no, it's not likely that it happened from that lab. So they're like, absolutely not. And people are still not convinced that that is a possibility. So the Biden administration hasn't taken a definitive position on the lab leak theory, but COVID-19 spokesperson Anthony Fauci played down the idea last week. And I had mentioned this in my report on Saturday, that he was trying to rebut Robert Redfield, the former chief of the CDC, who had gone on to TV and said he thought that the most likely path was from that lab in Wuhan. And he said, Dr. Redfield said that the virus transfer to a lab worker is not unusual in such research. I mean, the thing is, they offer no proof. So how do you make statements like that and not have any proof? So, when it comes to science, you have to prove it. You can't just make a statement like that. Okay, so I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that. While that was happening, meanwhile, the CDC director gave an emotional warning of quote, impending doom with COVID-19 cases rising. Meanwhile, President Biden said on Monday that his administration is adding new vaccine sites as he and other officials asked Americans to keep taking precautions. President Biden said the administration is doubling the number of pharmacies in the federal program and opening additional mass vaccination sites. He said 90% of adults would be eligible for vaccination by April 19, and 90% will have a vaccination site within 5 miles of their home. Several states have been broadening their eligibility requirements for vaccine appointments in the last week. Kroger also hopes to boost its health business through its pandemic efforts. The country's largest supermarket chain and the 4th largest pharmacy aims to deliver millions of COVID-19 vaccinations. The U.S. said that the U.S. is averaging about 2.7 million vaccinations a day. I think we actually had one day, maybe yesterday, where they vaccinated 4 million. So although the U.S. has vaccinated more people than any other country, and I hear that our neighbors in Canada are a little jealous of us, administration officials said the spread of new variants that are more transmittable and an increase in travel and loosened restrictions in several states could lead to a surge in cases and deaths. Now, I don't know. I keep seeing reports that say, well, Texas, they loosened up their restrictions and they haven't had a spike in cases. So I'm not really sure exactly why we're seeing this spike, because either people haven't been wearing masks all along, or it's an airborne disease. So if it's in the area and you're not well protected, then there's a good chance you're going to catch it because it's still around. The CDC chief, Rochelle Walensky, said on Monday that the most recent data show the 7-day average growing to about 60,000 cases a day, which she said was a 10% increase compared to the prior 7-day period. And she said that hospitalizations were up to 4,800 admissions in the 7-day average compared to 4,600 admissions in the prior 7-day period. So as long as the numbers are going up, they're still, saying, okay, look at, please be careful. On Wednesday, the Pfizer announced that its COVID-19 vaccine is safe and strongly protective in kids as young as 12. Most COVID-19 vaccines that were rolled out worldwide are for adults who are at higher risk from the coronavirus. But the Pfizer vaccine is now approved for 16 and older. The Pfizer and its partner BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine is 100% effective against the virus in children ages 12 to 15, the company announced in a press release on Wednesday. Now, some fallouts due to COVID-19. I wanted to touch on the eviction freeze that has been extended for 3 months. Now, we keep talking about the numbers and the people that are infected, and we haven't really spoken about what's going on locally with people on, are they able to make their rent? Are they able to find a job? How are people surviving? I mean, even though we've gotten these checks, that's not enough to keep us going. I mean, thank you, it helps, but if you're not working, how are people making ends meet? Well, it seems that now the press is starting to write about this. The national eviction moratorium was extended through June of 2021. And supposedly, this is going to help millions of tenants who've fallen behind on their rent, despite the court still, trying to decide whether it's legal or not. So the Biden administration, as I said, they announced a 3-month extension to a national eviction moratorium. And even though that this is supposed to help the tenants that are behind on their rent, the courts, not all of them, are disagreeing on whether this relief is legal. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention extended the eviction moratorium through June 30th. It had been set to expire on Wednesday of this week, which was the end of March. The moratorium originated from an executive order signed in September by the former president, Donald Trump, which protects tenants who have missed monthly rent payments from being thrown out of their homes if they declare financial hardship. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented a historic threat to the nation's public health, the White House said on Monday. Keeping people in their homes and out of crowded or congregate settings like homeless shelters by preventing evictions is a key step in helping to stop the spread of COVID-19. A series of conflicting court rulings have called into question the legality of the moratorium. At least 3 federal judges in Tennessee, Ohio, and Texas have ruled the moratorium is illegal. The Justice Department is appealing those cases. Other judges have rejected challenges to the moratorium. In December, a ruling in Louisiana, a federal judge said the CDC had clear legal authority to take those measures that it deems reasonably necessary to prevent the spread of disease, so long as it determines that the measures taken by any state or local government are insufficient. That decision followed a similar ruling from Georgia in October. Other cases are in progress, including one in which realtors associations and several housing providers are challenging the moratorium in a Washington, D.C. federal court. The extension comes as the administration seeks to distribute $46.6 billion in rental assistance authorized by the U.S. Congress. The aid is being administered by state and local governments, many of which are still setting up their assistance programs. Millions of renters have been unable to pay some or even all of their rent since March 2020, when the pandemic began. And that could translate into $52 billion of unpaid rent. It's estimated that the average household has fallen behind on rent and owes over $5,500. In the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, they ran a story and they said while the moratorium has been extended, the more federal aid is on tap, many fear it won't be enough. Are you bracing for eviction? So billions of dollars in federal aid that are going to help renters who've fallen behind isn't thought to be enough to avert what landlords and housing nonprofits say is a brewing eviction crisis. In other words, the other shoe has not dropped. So eviction moratoriums, which were enacted in many states early in the pandemic, prohibit the physical removal of tenants. Tenants are protected through at least June by the federal moratorium, which the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention extended this week. But Connecticut's eviction moratorium is currently scheduled to end on April 19, followed by New York's on May 1. New Jersey's moratorium is going to end 2 months after the expiration of the state's public health emergency. So landlords are still filing evictions in court in New Jersey, and thousands of notices have been filed during the pandemic. That's a fraction of the people who have fallen behind on rent. But as soon as the moratorium ends, there's going to be an avalanche of evictions. Millions of U.S. renters accumulated between $25 billion and $34 billion in owed rent by January, according to estimates prepared for the National Council of State Housing Agencies, which is an investment bank and advisory firm. A lot of money there, a lot of money. In New Jersey, hundreds of thousands of households owed up to $1.3 billion in back rent as of January, according to an estimate there. In New York, up to 1.2 million renters owed as much as $3.4 billion. And in Connecticut, more than 100,000 renters owed up to $400 million. The COVID-19 relief package passed by Congress in December awarded New Jersey and local governments $594 million for rental relief programs, in addition to $120 million previously allocated to the state. New York State was given $1.3 billion for rent relief in December, while Connecticut received about $236 million. So eventually, this is going to all come to a head. And people are scared. And, I mean, you're just going to have to deal with it. If you are in a situation like that, just like when we had the housing bubble in 2008, 2009, and a lot of people lost their homes, stay in your apartment or where you're renting as long as you can. Don't leave before you have to. Once the court order comes in and the sheriff shows up at your door, then you have to be out. I think you have to be, they usually give you 7 days, but I don't know in this situation what's going to happen. It just depends on the judge, I would say. Okay, now moving on to other sad news. The trial of Derek Chauvin began Monday in Minneapolis with a 911 dispatcher talking about the white former Minneapolis police officer who faces murder and manslaughter charges for holding down George Floyd on the ground with a knee on his neck. Chauvin is charged with second-degree attempted murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter. He has pleaded not guilty. He's being tried separately from 3 other former police officers involved in George Floyd's death. Those officers are each charged with second-degree, aiding and abetting felony murder, and second-degree aiding and abetting manslaughter. They have pleaded not guilty, and their trials are scheduled for August. Almost every person that came on the stand this week has cried. Of course, you know that the trial is being televised nationally. And I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but it's something that has riveted the country. It has people like, just holding their breath as to, what's going to happen. The video has been the central focus of the trial, and they, of course, have shown the footage, the disturbing footage, early on during the opening statements of the police officer putting his knee and remembering that it was for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. The trial, it's hard to watch. It's something that every person that has come up has felt bad because they weren't able to do more. And I'm sure everyone is having problems sleeping that had to witness it, went through it, and now they're having to go through it again. On Tuesday, Darnella Frazier, who's now 18 years old, the bystander who recorded that event on her cell phone of the video of George Floyd's death that went viral, she had to testify. And to protect her identity, the judge allowed her to testify off camera because the trial is being televised, and they only used her first name. She also, when she was on her way to the store, she had a 9-year-old, I believe, cousin with her who also had to testify. So she was also off camera as well. They've all mentioned that they've agonized for nights, that they wish they could have done more, but they couldn't. The woman that was responsible for the viral video, she said that she was walking with her 9-year-old cousin to the Cup food store to buy snacks, and told her cousin to go into the store while she came back where the police officers were that had handcuffed George Floyd. They had put him on the ground next to a patrol car, and she identified the officer, Chauvin, in court as the officer that she saw with his knee on the back of Floyd's neck. She said, Darnella said she immediately pulled out her cell phone and started recording the video. And when she was asked to describe what she saw, Darnella said, a man terrified, scared, begging for his life. It wasn't right, she said. He was suffering. He was in pain. I heard George Floyd saying, I can't breathe. Please get off of me. He cried for his mom. It seemed like he knew it was over for him. She said that when she started recording, she was the only bystander around. Soon, a crowd gathered and began yelling at the officers to get off of Floyd. But, of course, that didn't happen. She said the more the bystanders pleaded with Chauvin to stop, the more he seemed to use force. And his supervisor has said that that just was not necessary. That force just was not necessary. If anything, he was actually kneeling in harder, and he was shoving his knee into his neck, she said. She said at one point, Chauvin and a fellow officer put their hands on their mace canister, apparently that they were going to, use it on the crowd to back up as the witnesses grew louder and shouted expletives at the officers. She said nothing the bystanders said to Chauvin seemed to matter. He just stared at us, looked at us, she said. He had a cold look, heartless. He didn't care. She said Chauvin refused to let up even when paramedics initially arrived and attempted to check Floyd's pulse. She said a paramedic checked his pulse first while Chauvin's knee still remained on George Floyd's neck. Oh, there were more people that testified. And the testimony continues next week. In New York, a lawsuit against Trump can now proceed after the New York State's highest court on Tuesday cleared the way for a former Apprentice contestant defamation lawsuit against Donald Trump to move forward, according to a story in the Wall Street Journal. The Apprentice contestant, that's the show that former President Trump was on, Summer Zervos, claimed in the weeks before the 2016 election that Mr. Trump groped and kissed her without her consent in 2007. In 2017, she sued then Mr. Trump for defamation after he denied her allegations and called her story a hoax. Mr. Trump has said the suit has no merit. And Mr. Trump's lawyers had argued that state court lawsuits against the sitting president must be put on hold or dismissed, repeatedly delaying Ms. Zervo's suit. Well, now, in one sentence order, Tuesday, New York's Court of Appeals said the issues that Mr. Trump presented had become moot. Tuesday's ruling means that Mr. Trump could be questioned under oath for the lawsuit because he's no longer a president. So we'll see how far that gets. Still on the Wall Street Journal, there was a story that appeared on page 6 on the right column of a photo of the DC cherry blossom, and that's the suit about Donald Trump. And then on the left column, we had an obit that Gordon Liddy died. For those of you that might be young, you might not remember him, but G. Gordon Liddy is a mastermind, or was, of the Watergate burglary, and he also was a radio talk show host after he got out of prison. Well, he died Tuesday at the age of 90. His son confirmed, but he didn't say what he died of. We were told that it wasn't related to COVID, though. Mr. Liddy is a former Federal Bureau of Investigation agent and Army veteran. He was convicted of conspiracy, burglary, and illegal wiretapping for his role in the Watergate burglary, which led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon. He spent 4 years and 4 months in prison, including more than 100 days in solitary confinement. Mr. Liddy was outspoken both as a political operative and as a radio personality. Mr. Liddy recommended assassinating political enemies, bombing a left-leaning think tank, and kidnapping war protesters. He was also convicted of conspiracy in the September 1971 burglary of Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office in search of damaging information on Mr. Ellsberg, who leaked the secret history of the Vietnam War known as the Pentagon Papers, that in the Associated Press. As I mentioned, cherry blossom season was in full bloom. It peaked on Sunday of last week. It was supposed to peak this weekend, Easter weekend, but because of warm weather in the Washington, D.C. area, it peaked early. So, hope you guys are enjoying beautiful blooms in your area. I know going to see the cherry blossoms is a big deal. I remember when I lived in Washington, D.C., and I worked as a journalist there. going to the tidal basin and taking photos. And you just, as gorgeous as it is, you just can never do it justice in a photo. You have to be there in person and experience it. So hopefully you get a chance to do that. There was an ad that appeared on Wednesday, March 31 on page A7 in the Wall Street Journal that I found to be very interesting that I wanted to mention. It was a paid ad that was directed at General Motors chairman and CEO Mary Barra, saying that she refuses to sit down with Black-owned media companies. And I guess she had been approached by a number of people, and she had referred them to someone else in the company, and these people are not too happy because the ad dollars that are being spent for GM are not being spent in Black publications and media, and they want to try to get a piece of the pie. Okay, that's not going to bid well for GM. Now, on to another story that captivated everybody last week. On Monday, Egyptian national television broadcasted live coverage of the salvage operation that involved 11 tugboats and several dredgers. You know why? Because engineers were working around the clock to dig out a huge container ship. They were battling high winds and strong tides because the Egyptian leader was saying, I need results. The world is watching us. There was a tanker called the Ever Given, one of the world's largest ships, operated by Taiwan-based Evergreen Group, that had entered the southern end of the 120-mile Suez Canal, and the last leg of its voyage to Europe from China. It had 18,000 containers, and it was 220 tons. So it had previously passed through the 150-year-old canal, which links the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, but this time it veered into the East Bank at about 7:30 a.m. during a ferocious sandstorm. And if anybody had seen pictures of this tanker, it was kind of like sideways. So it was stuck on the sandbar, and it caused a big havoc. So what happened is hundreds of ships were stuck on both ends, waiting, and they didn't know what to do. So what ended up happening is that the tides started to rise because there was a full moon, and even though that there were pictures of this little dredger, that's excavator that's digging up around that ship that went viral, that were very upsetting to the people working on dredging the sand. They had to go down nearly 60 feet before that they were finally able to get the ship free. But I mean, can you imagine working around the clock, not sleeping, and trying to get this tanker loose, and then a photo goes viral, and everybody's joking about, this little dredger that's trying to free this huge ship. They ended up that they had to remove some of the 18,000 containers just to lighten up the load. But I mean, we're going to see the fallout. We don't even know the effect right now. Because the ships were stuck there, They all backed up. What they're predicting now is that there's going to be an increase in costs due to the delays, and even though the freeing of the ship was broadcast, everybody was, shouting Allahu Akbar, God is great, and everybody was glad. Even CNN went live as the Floyd family was taking a knee prior to the start of the Chauvin trial, because this story was deemed so important for world trade. And at first I thought, okay, a ship caught in the Suez Canal. Why is everybody making such a big deal about it? And everybody was just like reporting about it, going crazy, talking about it. That's all they did every day. Oh my God, it's going to take weeks for it. It made national news. Everybody was leading with that. Okay, all right. Well, because the importance of our economy and everything is just starting to get going, that it was so important for these goods to start reaching retailers and plants. So it's going to be behind for quite some time. So even though that ships started moving through the Suez Canal on Tuesday morning, after they got that 220,000 ton vessel freed, we have no idea what it's going to cost, companies, and what it's going to cost us. The Wall Street Journal on Tuesday morning had that same ship on the front page. Hey, the ship is freed after 6 days, opening the Suez to global trade. So it was a big deal, and I don't know what's going to be happening, because there's delays to supplies and rising costs because of the backup. So there's also another factor, because some ships didn't want to wait and they were told that it could take weeks. Some ships are actually going around the southern tip of Africa. That's adding like 2 weeks to their trip and costing them $26,000 a day in fuel costs. So we have no idea what that's going to happen. We'll find out more about that. As I mentioned, a lot of people were talking about that story, and it seems that it was a change of pace, and a lot of people were talking about it. There were 1.8 million social media posts, and so there were other stories, of course, the polarization of the politics, COVID, the insurrection and crisis at the border, where agents have arrested more than 170,000 migrants in March alone. And Google even added an animation of parading ship emojis when you searched for the Suez Canal. So everybody had a lot of fun with that. Now, back to the economy. President Biden is preparing 4 tax increases worth about $1.8 trillion to help pay for his Build Back Better infrastructure package. And he seems confident that he'll be able to pass that, because voters are pleased with his $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief bill. We'll see what happens with Republicans. There's a new NPR Marist poll that was out this week that finds 2/3 of Americans approve of the job President Biden is doing with the pandemic. The poll also showed an uptick in the number of Americans who say they'll get a COVID-19 vaccine. Biden's overall approval rating was up to 52%. But on the issue of immigration, only 34% of Americans gave him high marks. So he, depending on what the issue is. Okay, so I think that we are going to leave it there for today. Tomorrow on Easter, for the Heart and Home podcast, I will cover the Pope's recent visit to Iraq and a look at where U.S. churches are open. Of course, you probably already know this because you're making plans. You either need reservations or there's limited capacity. Elsewhere around the world, public worship is still banned in Ireland and the Philippines. In Jerusalem, they celebrated Good Friday. But before we go, I wanted to tell you about Aya, who's a 14-month-old and has spinal muscular atrophy. She needs a drug called Zolgensma that costs $2.1 million to save her life before she turns 2. Her parents are in a race against time and want to bring Aya from Sweden to the United States for treatment. I'll include a link to their GoFundMe page in my show notes. I'll talk to you tomorrow, Easter Sunday.